Hi, Mike.
Hi, Jeff, how are you?
Hello, good evening. Mindful you're joining us on Zoom.
Yeah, apologies. I am
Taking you.
waiting for a locksmith to turn up.
Waiting for a locksmith. I hear. Good luck.
Thanks.
Okay. So I believe we're on page. Does anyone have the exact page?
214.
214. That sounds right. Yes, we're about to do that. What's called, and my Yiddish is terrible. One of my kryptonites. I have several kryptonites, but one of them is Yiddish. I grew up in Yek.
You just froze.
In Hebrew, but it's called the Heiche Kedusha. On page, I'm just going to share screen for those watching. Is that the pronunciation though? The Heiche Kedusha or the Heiche Kedusha in Yiddish? Shortened repetition. So last time we looked, I'm just going to share screen. Okay. So last time we spoke about somebody who comes late to shul and when they're able to start their Amida, and we said basically if they think they can start and finish before the Shliach Tzibur gets to the Kedusha, then they should do that. But if not, they should wait. And we saw the Machlokes in the Shulchan Aruch Ramah is if you start word for word with the Chazan when he starts his repetition, and then you answer and you say the Kedusha along with him, or if you wait till after Hakel HaKadosh and then you start your Amida. But perhaps even Ashkenazim can start word for word if they want. And today we're going to start looking at the shortened repetition, namely the Heiche Kedusha, or what happens when the minyan for whatever reason is under duress and there's no time to do Chazar Tashatz. So what you do is that straight after Kaddish, let's say Mincha, straight after Kaddish, you go straight into the Chazan saying it out loud. Then either everyone says along word for word with him and Kedusha, and then everyone goes quiet after Hakel HaKadosh, or everyone listens and says Amen and asks Kedusha, and then when the Chazan says Hakel HaKadosh and then goes quiet, then everyone starts their Amida. But this is what's called the sort of the skipping, what we know as the quick Mincha or the Heiche Kedusha. So where does this come from? So the Kolbo, one of the Ashkenazi Rishonim, brings this practice, although slightly differently to the way that it's done today. And he quotes here the Minhag, and see if we can tell the differences. In source 35 here on page 214, says the Kolbo, Umitpalalim shmona esrei al haseder belachash, you daven the Amida quietly, v'achar kach chozer shliach tzibur hatefila lahotzi mi she'enu baki. And afterwards, the Chazan does a repetition to fulfill the obligation of those who don't know how to daven. Come on, tefillat shacharit b'kol ram, just like in shacharit. But tzibur shelo hitpalu. What if the tzibur has not yet daven mincha and it's nearly sunset? The ein shahut bayom hitpalel. Hat tzibur belachash v'leired shliach tzibur lifnei teva. It's nearly shkia, let's say. There's not enough time to daven the silent Amida and also to do the repetition. He gives us a bit of musa here. Even though it's asur to ever get into such a situation where you've not got enough time to daven. Even so, if you were to do this, the congregation would fulfill their obligation by hearing the Shliach Tzibur. And this is their obligation. The congregation should stand behind him as the Chazan davens from beginning to end. As if you're davening for yourself. You're not allowed to make any interruption. You're not allowed to speak. You answer Kedusha. And afterwards, then you say Tachanan. And then you say the full Kaddish. So he brings this idea of the quicker version, which is just the Chazan that recites it, but indifferent to what we do. He says that the Chazan says the whole thing aloud, right? So the Kolbo sort of prevents the first minhag is that the Chazan, if there's no time, the Chazan just says the whole thing aloud, and we all say it, or we stand quietly and say it along with him, which is different to what we do today, which is that we go quiet to Hakel HaKadosh. And that's what we're going to see why that's different. So anyway, we see this minhag in the Kolbo, but even the Kolbo had said it's not something that you can do in general. It's something when there's a time of need, which is when they're running out of time. In other words, what's the example the Kolbo gave? It's almost shkia, and you've not got enough time to do both shacharit, to do both the silent Amida and the repetition because it's almost sunset. So now we're on page 215. 215 now, top of 215. So the Bet Yosef brings this minhag that the Kolbo says. And even though the Kolbo had said it as Shat Chak, The Beit Yosef said it was common practice to do this as a lechatchila endeavor, to only do the repetition out loud. So he says in source 36, Va'achshav, and now nahagu b'rov hamakomot, in most places, he says, the custom is leitpalel lechatchila shliach tzibur tfilat hamincha b'kol ram. They would just do the repetition at mincha in a loud voice, kadei sheyanu kedusha acharav, and so they'd answer kedusha, v'lo yistarech lachzor leitpalel b'kol ram, and don't need to pray aloud again. They would just do the Heicha Kedusha. And he says that was the minhag b'rov makomot. So in the Beit Yosef's time, this was the default practice. And that's obviously changed a lot. So even though it was a lechatchila idea in the Beit Yosef's time, the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah, says in source 37 that still, like the kolba, that should only be done b'shat chaka, at time of great need. And the Ramah here in source 37, his Darkei Moshe, says that's not the minhag Ashkenaz. We only do this in a time of great need. He says, Aval ein anu noagin ken. We don't have this custom. First, everyone davens quietly, unless it's really necessary. Like the time for mincha is going to go by. This is also musa for shuls, especially in the summer, that they sometimes fix mincha on Friday afternoon, like 10 minutes before shkia. It never happens that the shliach tzibur finishes usually. Like, it's just something to think about. Like, if we're willing to do the Heicha Kedusha on a regular day in order to avoid having to say Chazarat HaShatz after Shkia, then it should be all the more so true regarding Shabbat as well, perhaps. But either way, he says, Shechashinan, we're concerned that Mincha is going to go. Only then would the Ramah you allow to do this. Only then would the Ramah agree. Then you say the Amidah out loud. They could answer Kedusha at the right time. That's what the Maharil brings. The Maharil has a requirement that at least one person should be answering Amen. Because if you do Heicha Kedusha and everyone starts with the Chazan, and they're saying their own silent Amidah is with him, they're not able to answer Amen. So the Maharil wanted one person who maybe had already davened be able to at least answer Amen to the brachot. Nonetheless, in contrast to what's going on in Sfard, the Beit Yosef has said Rov Makomot. The practice has been maybe in Sfard and also in Tzfat, perhaps where he was, to do this. Only the Heicha Kedusha. The Ramah says in Ashkenaz this is not the minhag. Now, this might partially be, call me a bit of an academic here, but this might be partially to do just in terms of their location. Because in both Spain and then subsequently in Sfarad, in Tzfat, is where the Makubalim were, the Kabbalists. And we saw last time, what did the Kabbalists say? What was the main part of Tefillah? The Kedusha, the repetition itself. They said, remember, they had that we saw the Chatam Sofer last week, who says that according to the Makubalim, according to the Kabbalists, the repetition is the primary part of them. That is Tfilat Hatzibur. And that the silent Amidah is just a preparation for that. Whereas the Ashkenazi poskim said, what are you talking about? So perhaps we see that this is very much, hashkafically aligned to essentially with the Ramah's rejecting of this as being widespread, even though that was the case in the Beit Yosef's time. Nonetheless, even though the Beit Yosef himself says this was the minhag b'rov makomot, in the Shulchan Aruch, he does not paskin this. And it's only the Ramah who adds this idea of the Heicha Kedusha. So even though in the Beit Yosef he says this was the widespread custom, he does not bring it lahalacha in the Shulchan Aruch. Only the Ramah does. In source 38 says the Shulchan Aruch, Shliach Tzibur shenichnas to Beit HaKnesset, Chazan who's going to comes into a shul, umatzah Tzibur shehitpalalu belachash. So this is, we're talking about the days, still have shuls like this around, where they had a fixed Chazan. And it was a fixed Chazan. His job was to be the Chazan. And the Chazan comes late to shul, and they're already in their silent Amidah. And the Chazan, he's expected to go to the to the front of daven. He doesn't have time to do a silent Amidah and to daven. So what's the halacha? The Shulchan Aruch says he could just do the repetition. He doesn't have to do the silent Amidah first if he's late. So Shliach Tzibur shenichnas leBeit HaKnesset, Shliach Tzibur comes to shul. Umatzat Tzibur shepalu belachash, they're already in their silent Amidah. Who tzarich la'amod lifnei hateva la'alti? He has to go straight to the amud to daven. Yored lifnei hateva, he can go straight to the front. And start the repetition straight away, even though he hasn't done his own silent Amidah yet. But he doesn't have to repeat the prayer quietly. the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention the idea of Heichel Kedusha. Only the Ramah adds it. Haga v'chein im hushatat chak. The same is true in a time of great need. Like he was, scared that the time for davening is going to pass. It's going to be shkia. They can start the repetition immediately or start the allowed obedience straight away. Community daven word by word with him, balachash silently, until after Kedusha and Kel Kadosh. And it's like the Maharil, it's best at least one person who hasn't davened, who was already davened, will be able to answer Amen. So the Ramah is ultimately the one who brings this idea of doing the shortened Amida in cases of Shatat Chat. And again, what is the example the Ramah brings? That it's going to be sunset and there's not going to be enough time to recite the repetition. Over the page, 216, the Mishnah Berurah says that this is all Shatat Chat. He emphasizes it's a time of great need. And if it's not a time of great need, we should not be relying on the idea of Heichel Kedusha. So says the Mishnah Berurah in source 39, Uvelo Shatat Chat, and when it's not a time of great need, Hiskimu Harbe Achronim Shelo Lasot Ken. Many Achronim agree you shouldn't do this. Heichel Kedusha. The original institution was to daven silently Amida and then only allowed afterwards. So the Mishnah Berurah says that we should only do this for Shabbat Chak. So we've come a long way from that minhag which the Beit Yosef said, which was widespread practice, at least in the communities that he was exposed to the psak here of the Mishnah Berurah. And the Yalkut Yosef also rules against it. Now, interestingly enough, Rav Avadia, big proponent, pusher of Sfarad, so he brings his son here in the Yalkut Yosef, but Rav Avadia himself rules this way. He has a tshuva about it in Yechaveh Dat, that there was, and we'll see his son similarly in source 40, that there was widespread minhag, not just in communities in Sfarad, but also in yeshivas, to only do the repetition. And again, it might be only to do the Heichel Kedusha. And again, it might be al pi Kabbalah, the idea that the tefillah out loud is tefillat hatzibur, and therefore that's the primary tefillah. But Rav Avadia spoke out against it and said that we should really change that minhag. And his son writes similarly to this tshuva in source 40. The Yalkut Yosef says, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef here in source 40, that even though is a Sephardi, we should remove this minhag. And again, because the Shulchan Aruch did not pass on that. So he says in source 40, this idea of a short mincha, with a shorter repetition, without the repetition, this practice is not halachically acceptable, and we need to cancel it. However, he does give one exception. If there is a very small minyan, you've only basically got 10 people, what if among the 10 people you have people who are not so worthy? You've got a minyan of just 10 people, and they're not going to answer Amen necessarily, but are not Amen to answer Amen. Then maybe there's room because of the concern of bracha levatala. If you've got a minyan of just 10 people, and not all of them are careful to answer Amen, if they don't answer Amen, they're causing the chazan to have a bracha levatala. So maybe in that case he would concede. Then maybe it's best just to do one Amida rather than to do a repetition. Ben b'shachrei or ben b'mincha, both are shachrei and mincha. But if you've got a minyan of God-fearing people, especially if you've got a very big minyan, where the hope is at least 9 people answering Amen to the chazan, that you're sure there's at least 10 people listening and answering Amen, then there's an obligation. If you've got definitely 9 people answering the chazan Amen, then you have to daven with the repetition and chalila lahakel. God forbid to be lenient.
Why do you reconcile that you need to have
so the Maharil was saying that was the Shliach Tzibura's Amida. That was his private Amida in the Maharil's case. So he just wanted for proper. It should be proper that one person answer Amen, and if everyone's doing that Amida with him, no one can answer Amen. So he said it's best if one person with daven is present. but to answer amen. But here we're talking about regular tefillah, chazarat hashatz. The shliach tzibur himself has already davened. The whole onus on him to do the repetition is for the tzibur. And if you don't have 9 people answering amen, it's a bracha levatala. It's chazarat hashatz. You need tisha onin. You need 9 people to, in theory, to perhaps answer. So machloket there is exactly, about 6 or 10. So meaning 5, chazan plus 5 or chazan plus 9. But the idea is that you're going to have people responding, and if there's a concern that's not going to happen, then he would say, okay, so you could do the hecha kedusha and skip the repetition. But otherwise, chalila hakem, we shouldn't be lenient in this regard. He therefore says, "V'lachen chova kedusha mutelet al rashei hayeshivot levatel ma shenahagu b'kam yeshivot." Rashi yeshiva have got to cancel this minhag. Now, some yeshivas have the dalega chazarat shleich tzibur, they skip repetition. L'achzir atara lo yoshna u'lanhig chazarat shleich tzibur, and to go back to the original glory of doing repetition properly, ketakanat gonei Israel, which is the original enactment of the sages. V'yamdu ala mishmar v'yeshkichu shakahal yatu ozen, and they should make sure that the community do listen. Ozen kashevet, they give ear lebichotav shleich tzibur lanot amen, and they answer the chazan's brachot and answer amen. So Rav Avadia and his son Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef here go all the way around and say that even though the Beit Yosef brought this minhag, nonetheless Shulchan Aruch did not rule this way, and one should not rely on it unless it's a shatev chak. Now Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky in the Emet Liakov tries to explain how it is that certain yeshivot and minyanim did have this practice to do the hecha kedusha, because the Beit Yosef had said it was practice, and it did sort of stick in some communities. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky here in source 41 in his Emet Liakov tries to explain, justify why it, unlike Rav Avadia and Yitzchak Yosef, why it might be that people did this. So let's see in source 41, he says here in source 41, the Emet Liakov, it would seem, she'ikar takanat chazarat hashatz haita rak b'batei hakneset. The original enactment of chazarat hashatz was only in shuls. Why in shuls, as opposed to in yeshivas or in work minyanim? Shesham hitpalu amei haaretz shelo yadu hitpalel. That's where the amei haaretz, simple people who didn't know how to daven, would go to daven. Ava b'beit hamidrash, but in yeshivas, shesham hitpalu rak al talmidei chachamim, only Torah scholars would daven. Lo tiknu chazarat hashatz palal. Says Rabbi Kamenetsky, it could be they never instituted chazarat hashatz in the yeshivas where everyone is proficient and knows how to daven. Dehatam lo hayu she'einam bekiyim. There were not people there who didn't know, who weren't proficient in tefillah. And therefore, argues Rav Kamenetsky trying to justify the minhag of the yeshivot, that maybe there was never a takana to say chazarat hashatz in yeshivot, but only in shuls. In certain places, in more Kabbalistic places, but Rav Avadia did a holy war in this and tried to eliminate it entirely. And therefore, he tries to explain in the bold there, v'zehu atam, this is the reason, shebaharbe yeshivat einam chozrim atfilah b'mincha. This might be why many yeshivas, they didn't do repetition at mincha. Shebabeit hamidrash lo hayta takana klal. They never enacted this practice in the Beit Midrash. Rak b'shachar chazru atfilah afilu Beit Midrash b'shim smicha kula tefillah. And even in yeshivas, they would only repeat the repetition at shacharit for other reasons, because the requirement of smicha gula tefillah to juxtapose shema to the amida, because they can't respond to the kedusha between Ga'al Yisrael and the amida. And therefore, in the yeshivot, still shacharit they would do repetition, but not at mincha. He tries to argue basically maybe the original takana was not for yeshivot, but only for batei knesset, only for shuls where amcha would daven, but not for yeshivot. Having said this, the Piskei Teshuvot says this is not the derech hamelech. This is not the primary way at looking at things, and still, like the Mishnah Berurah said, only b'tchak, whether you're in a yeshiva or otherwise, only b'shat tchak should one rely on the idea of the hechi kedusha. So it says the Piskei Teshuvot in source 42. Ava below shat tchak, without a type, there's no great need. Should only daven in the way Chazal enacted. Silent amida followed by the repetition. Especially those who follow the Arizal. Despite the idea that the Arizal and other Mukbalim had said that the repetition is the main bit of the Amida, is the out loud tefillah. Nonetheless, there is a Masorah brought that the Arizal himself was careful to have the silent Amida. He would have people daven in the order of Chazal. So the Arizal, as we know, wasn't as bothered about Shkia. It was more important that you had the silent Amida followed by the repetition. But often even if the silent Amida is going to be after, even if the repetition is going to be after Shkia. So, and that sort of explains a little bit the minhag of the Hasidim, that it's best not to change around the order of tefillah. Having said this, even amongst the Hasidim, the primary bit was the out loud tefillah, and therefore Rav Ovadia and others, and Piskei Teshuvot here all says that only b'shat Chak should we be relying on Hechik Kedusha. But even more so, the Hechik Kedusha which we do today is different to what the Kolbo had originally explained. Remember, the Kolbo had said that the Chazan is supposed to say the whole Amida out loud, and everyone's supposed to say along with him word for word quietly. How did that change to today, where we don't do that? The Chazan just says to our Kaddish out loud, and everyone goes quiet, including the Chazan. So what changed? So let's see in the Bir Halacha here over the page, on page 40, on page 218, source 43, the Bir Halacha explains why it is that nowadays we don't do exactly what the Kolbo originally said, but rather after Kela Kadosh, everyone goes quiet, which for the Mekubalim is even worse, because that means you've got no repetition. You've only got three brachot allowed. This is the Sibul. So it says the Bir Halacha in source 43. Balachash, you should say along quietly ad la'achar Kela Kadosh, until after Kela Kadosh, and then you go quiet. I have a Prima Gadim shehiskim. Look at the Prima Gadim who agreed. So the Prima Gadim says that really, ideally, is the Chazan when he's doing Heicha Kedusha should in fact say the whole thing out loud, and you should be saying it with him word for word. And when you get to you need to get to the end of Shema Koleinu at the same time as the Chazan. And also the thing we learned last week, you're supposed to bow at Modim for your private Modim at the same time that the Chazan is doing his public Modim. And so the Prima Gadim says that really one shouldn't go quiet. One should ideally say it out loud. And he says the Levush says the same thing. You're supposed to say it out loud. And he says maybe the Gra also held this way. It's implied that the Gra also held similarly. So it points out the Bir Halacha that unlike the Ramah who says you go quiet after Kela Kadosh, which I think is what we're all used to, that wasn't what some of the other Achronim had said. The Achronim said, like the Kolbo originally said, to say the whole thing out loud. Points out the Bir Halacha, the Ha'alam Einogim came, but that's not the meaning of the Olam. Ela rather, Teichif l'Acha Kela Kadosh, Gam HaShliach Tzibur mitpalel balachash. Immediately after Kela Kadosh, even the Shliach Tzibur goes quiet in his tefillah. What is the reason against the Kolbo that we do this? So he tries to explain now. He says, maybe the reason for this custom is that we go quiet after Kela Kadosh is Mishum de Barov Nohagim HaTzibur Lahamtim Ad Sheyisayim HaShliach Tzibur HaKela Kadosh. On the average, most people, remember we saw last week, there are two options. You either start with, when you're late to shul, you either start with the Chazan, word for word, or you wait till after Kedusha HaKela Kadosh, and then you start your Amida. So most people, like the Ramah said last week, he says, wait, they answer Kedusha, they answer all that means out loud, they say HaKela Kadosh, and then they start their Amida. Only after HaKela Kadosh. And if they're doing that, explains the Bir Halacha, that they're only starting 3 brachos behind the Chazan, for kasher lahem lahasigo achar kach. Therefore, it's too difficult for them to catch up to the Chazan afterwards. Lomar shomet ila omodim b'shaveh, in order to be at the same place with the Chazan at Shema Koleinu and Modim, and to bow at the same time. But if so, what benefit? What ta'elet? What is the point in davening aloud? So he says that the whole reason of saying the Kolbo said to say the whole thing aloud won't apply to a community who only start after HaKela Kadosh the silent Amida, because they will never catch up with the Chazan in time, and it'll just be distracting. And he tries to explain that's why we're quiet in this regard. So that seems to be the contemporary practice, though, that people who have to, because of time constraints, have to do Ha'echek Kedusha. The Chazan will say, there's two minhagim. Either people will start with the Chazan and say word for word, in which case you can't answer Amen, because you're in your Amida, but you can say the lines of Kedusha, and you say Lador Vadar. Or you don't start your Amida yet, and you answer Baruch Hu Shemon Amen to everything, and you answer Kedusha, and when he finishes Hakel HaKadosh and goes quiet, then you start your Amida. But either way, the consensus today is typically people are forced to do Heicha Kedusha, that the Chazan does go quiet after Hakel HaKadosh, and the Bir Halachos tried to explain why that might be the case, because many people start after Hakel HaKadosh and they never catch up with the Chazan anyway. Okay.
Rabbi,
yes.
That's when I mentioned this before, but when I was working in New York at one of the hospitals, that's exactly what they did, the latter one, where the Chazan davened up until after Kedusha and then stopped, and then everyone took their silent Amida.
Right. I'm saying because it's Mahogan between the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah, essentially, as to which is best. So there's different minhagim on that. But the advantage of starting right after Hakel HaKadosh is you get to answer Amen to the various brachot, and also, which you can't do if you were saying it word for word with him, you can't answer Amen. You can only say the lines of Kedusha that you're up to. And also, you get the advantage of kind of now you understand why it is the Chazan goes quiet. The whole reason the Chazan goes quiet, Hakel HaKadosh, is because he shouldn't be 3 brachos ahead from everyone when they start their Amida. And that's the whole reason he goes quiet against the original minhag as brought by the Kolba. Okay, so that brings us to an end of that chapter, and we will Be'ezrat Hashem move on now to chapter 6 and look at the mitzvah of the tefillah of Tashlumin. Tashlumin, which literally means lahashlim, is to complete. Somebody who misses a tefillah for whatever reason, in certain cases, as long as it wasn't deliberate that they missed the tefillah, would be required in the next tefillah to recite a Tashlumin, to do 2 Shmona Esreis. And that's what we're going to look at now. So what exactly is Tashlumin? So first, a couple of just brief halachot, but we'll learn it inside. But firstly, one of the good things we learn in the Gemara Masechet Brachot is that you could only do tefillah Tashlumin for a tefillah that you missed b'shogeg, inadvertently, but not honest, but not a tefillah which you missed b'mezid, deliberately. If a person deliberately decided to skip a tefillah, they would not be allowed to make up for it, as we will see inside, and the grey area we will discuss. The second thing is you can only make up for a tefillah in the immediate following tefillah. So if you miss Shacharit, you can make up for it in Mincha. But if you miss Shacharit and Mincha, you can only daven Ma'ariv twice. You can't daven Ma'ariv 3 times to make up. You can only make up for the last one. You can't make up for 2 times ago, which is also important halacha for in terms of Hilchot Tashlumin. And now we'll look inside to see some of the sources. Okay, so we're on page 233 here. The Gemara at the beginning of the 4th parak of the Masechet Brachot deals with this. In source 1, Gemara Brachot Daf Kaf Vav discusses the case of Tashlumin. The Gemara takes it as a given that you can do Tashlumin for the immediate following one, the immediate following tefillah. The question is, what happens if it goes over the halachic day? Meaning, I understand if I miss Ma'ariv, I can daven Amid of Shacharit twice. If I miss Shacharit Mincha, if I miss Mincha, the Gemara wants to know, can I daven Ma'ariv twice? Because Ma'ariv is already halachically the next day. Yes, Manny. You're on mute.
What's the purpose of davening twice? Because if your awareness, like Avraham, was of Shachris being significant, by davening it at Mincha time, you still mevatel Shachris, or by saying it at Ma'ariv time, it doesn't serve a purpose.
So the Gemara says that you earn tefillah, but not tefillah bismana. You get schar. The Gemara there, hasn't got the whole Gemara here. If you look at the full Gemara there in Kavav, it says you're marviach tefillah, but not tefillah bismana. So the Gemara kind of does deal with this. It says that it's not the optimal, but you still get the extra tefillah.
So I understand that, but what's the schar, or what's the purpose of davening something that has inherently a support for your awareness of chakras and how you conduct yourself in that first part of the day by doing it at night when your whole mental state is different?
So we're going to discuss a little bit why that might be. That might also explain that what we do is when we have 2 amidas, obviously. So the first one is the actual tefillah you're up to now, and the second one is considered the tashlumin. It's an important halacha. If you have the opposite kavanah, you don't fulfill either. You have to repeat both. If you have the first, which we're going to see also. So if you think that accidentally think the first one's tashlumin for mincha and the second one is mariv, that's wrong. It's the other way around. First you do the tefillah you're obligated in now, and then you do the tashlumin, which seems to imply again that you're not really when you're doing it now, you're not really being covered into mincha because it's mariv time now. You are doing a tashlumim at mariv. And another halacha which seems to imply this is the fact that let's say somebody missed a tefillah on Shabbos. Let's say somebody missed Shabbos mincha. They daven mariv motzi Shabbos twice. The Gemara says you daven chol. You don't daven the mincha of Shabbos. Now it's motzi Shabbos, so you do mariv twice. You do the nusach now, right? If somebody missed, here's a good one for you. If somebody missed mincha yesterday, and they'd had to daven mariv twice last night, the second mariv they'd still say v'tein talumata, because now it's mariv time, even though they're making up for mincha time when it was just v'tein bracha. So you're right. We haven't. That's what the Gemara really means when it says schar. You get schar tefillah, but you don't have schar tefillah b'zmana, because you can never really make up for the time you've missed of the kavanot of mincha. But you can make up for the fact that a tefillah has been missed, albeit not in the same way as the koach of that specific tefillah. And therefore, when you repeat the tashlumin, it's today's tefillah. It's not mincha's tefillah. Okay, so let's have a look in source 1 in the Gemara in Brachot. So says the Gemara, this dilemma about if you miss mincha twice, if you miss mincha, can you daven mariv twice? Because mariv is ready the next day. So Vaha Amar Rav Mari Barei de Rav Huna Barei de Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Ta'av v'lo hitpalel arvit mitpalel b'shachrit shtayim. So we know if you miss mariv, do 2 shachroses. Shacharit mitpalel b'mincha shtayim. And if you miss shacharit, you do 2 minchas. That 2 amidas of mincha. Ibailhu, but they ask Ta'av v'lo hitpalel mincha ma'oshi hitpalel arvit shtayim. If you miss mincha, can you do arvit twice because it's halachically the next day? Im tim salomar, if you're going to say ta'av v'lo hitpalel arvit mitpalel shacharit shtayim, if you're going to say that if you missed mariv, you daven shacharit twice, mishum dechad yomahu. That's because it's the same halachic day. Dichtiv, because it says vahi erev vayvoke yom echad. It was evening then morning. Avahacha, but here from mincha to mariv, tefillah b'makom korban. Surely tefillah comes in place of korban. The kivan she'avar yomo batel korbanot. Once the halachic days passed, you can't make up for a korban. So maybe once mincha time's gone, it's mariv halachically the next day. You cannot make up for it, like a korban. Avar's mano batel korbanot. Or dilma, or perhaps no. Kivan de tzluta rachamehi. Since tefillah, prayer is rachameh, it's begging Hashem for mercy and supplication. It's not really totally parallel to a korban, and therefore, kol emat dabai mat sleva azil. Whenever one wants, one can continue to daven. It's not as rigid as a korban. So that's what the Gemara asks. So the Gemara answers there, Tashema. So then we're on page 234 in the second paragraph. Tashema, come and listen. The Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yochanan. Ta'av v'lo hitpalel mincha mitpalel arvit shtayim. Somebody who makes a mistake and doesn't daven mincha, you do daven mariv twice. Ve'ein b'zeh mishum da'ava yoma b'sol korban. No, and there's no issue of the day having passed and the korban no longer being relevant. In other words, we see from the Gemara, tefillah is rachameh, tefillah is a supplication, and therefore the rules are not as rigid as they are for korban. And therefore, somebody who missed mincha by accident can daven mariv twice, even though mariv is halachically the next day. Another important halacha, though, meitivei, challenges from a braita. Surely, it quotes here a passage from Kehelet, ma'uvat lo yuchol litkon, v'chisaron lo yuchol lihimanot. Says the pasuk in Kehelet, a ma'uvat, a corrupt person or a crooked person, can never fix. V'chisaron, somebody who's lacking, lo yuchol lihimanot, can never be counted. Says the braita, ma'uvat lo yuchol litkon, a corrupt person will never be able to fix. Zesha bitel kriyat shema shel arvit, kriyat shema shel shacharit. This is somebody who deliberately missed shema at morning and night, or tefillah shel arvit, or tefillah shel shacharit, or tefillah in the morning at night. In other words, mu'uvat lo yuchal litkon. Somebody who is mu'uvat, somebody who deliberately is mu'uvat, somebody who's wicked, deliberately misses tefillah, will never be able to make up for it. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yochanan, hachava ma'askin. And when do we say that? Shebitel b'mezid. That is when you missed out the tefillah on purpose. If you deliberately miss out tefillah, there's no way of making up for it afterwards. Only somebody who inadvertently misses a tefillah is able to make up for it. Amar Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi Dei Kanam, you can actually prove this as well. Diktani, because it teaches in that Breita, Bitel, he nullified. In other words, he chose not to say it. V'lo katani ta'a. He doesn't say ta'a, he made a mistake, an error. Shma mina. You see from that. So you can even see from the terminology, the Breita, which says you can't make up for tefillah, use the word bitel, which means I actively left it out. So if you actively leave out tefillah, you cannot make up for it with tashlumin. But if you made a mistake, you can make up for it in the next tefillah in tashlum. Okay. So what about somebody who didn't deliberately miss tefillah, but somebody who, you know, made a mistake? They said, yeah, I'm going to have time to daven. Maybe weren't so careful about it. I have got time to daven. They tell themselves they've got time to daven, but then, you know, the day runs away and then they totally missed tefillah. They thought they would have time and then they didn't in the end. Is somebody, such a person considered shogeg or mazid in terms of working out whether they're obligated or not? So on page 235 in source 2, the Namukei Yosef discusses this. Somebody who thought they would have time to daven, they planned time, but they miscalculated the amount of time they needed and didn't daven on time. It says in the Namukei Yosef in source 2, such a person is not considered mazid, and they do have the opportunity to do tashlum. Amar HaMachaber, says the Machaber, source 2, says in Namukei Yosef. Nirali Barur, it seems clear to me. Somebody who didn't daven, even though they already had time to daven late earlier in the day, because that person thought, because he thought, I'll have time later, but he miscalculated, and as a result, he missed the time for davening. It's clear to me, says the Nimukei Yosef, so such a person, they're not considered mazid, or posheya, or a sinner. It's like the equivalent of somebody who made a mistake. That they can make up for it by davening the next tefillah twice. So it says in Nimukei Yosef, somebody who made a silly mistake and thought they had time to daven but were wrong, that person is not considered mazid. That person has a chance to daven the next Amida twice. And that's how the Nimukei Yosef rules. The Tzurba Shiur goes even further and rules with somebody who did miss out tefillah. They knew they were going to miss out tefillah, but it was due to financial concerns. They were going to be in serious financial loss. You can see why this is a bit of a dangerous tshuva, because, you know, we can all claim that we're going to work and, you know, we're missing, we can't daven, and it's okay. But the Tzurba Shiur was asked this question. If it's going to cause tremendous financial loss, and they missed tefillah because of a business deal that was going to go bad, are they allowed to do tashlumin in the next tefillah or not? So says the Tzurba Shiur in source 3, he was asked the following question. She'ilah, question. Ironim of kidim, so officials or clerks, shalchu acharav, or shehalach me'atzmam alehem. Somebody who came to him, or even if he went to them, machmat chob sheyesh lo al armaim, because of a debt that he has with the authorities. And the business deal went on and on. He could see the sun setting right behind him, or behind them. He couldn't let them go unless he loses the entire business deal and loses the entire debt. He's got to sit there, stuck in this business meeting until after Shkia, right? Is he allowed to make up for it and daven Mariv twice? Says the Tzurba Shiur, Shuva, Yireh would seem, to shaper damel hitpalel average time. You can daven Mariv twice in that case. Afal gav to kat to Ravata, even though the rabbis wrote, Hazid v'lo hitpalel tefillah achat b'zmana, somebody who deliberately didn't daven a tefillah, Shuva ein lo tashlumin, has no ability to make up for it, like the pasuk in Kehelet, to mu'uvat lo yachol itzkon, because a corrupt person can't make up for it. Crooked person can't make things straight again. That's the reason. It's because they're corrupt. Nira ki gavna, but in this case where he was stuck in the business meeting, lav mazid mikri. He's not considered mazid. V'dami la'ones, it's much more like somebody who's ba'ones, somebody that was beyond his ability, was beyond his control. And such a person, even though maybe it wasn't a good thing, would be allowed to daven mincha, would be allowed to daven Mariv twice if they missed mincha because they were stuck in a meeting. And if they were to walk out that meeting, it would cause a huge financial loss. That's what the Tzurba Shiur rules. It's quite revolutionary to think about releasing that tshuva to the masses, because it basically gives people people might think it's giving them carte blanche to miss tefillah for parnasa, but that's not the case, as we're going to see. He says, but Amrina over the page, he continues, but Amrina Nami, we also say prepare kama the brachot, the first pack of brachot, he's zaharuba talmid chacham sheshachach talmidom machmat onis. Be careful to respect his talmid chacham has forgotten his Torah due to things beyond his control. Perish Rashi there explains what's it referring to in the Gemara there. Shucholi onitra b'torach dochat mizonot. A talmid chacham who's sick, who's forgotten his Torah, or is bothered basically with providing for food. That's why he's forgotten his Torah. Mordechai quotes the name of Rabbeinu Tam. Regarding somebody that you can't leave before Shabbat on a boat. The Machalek Asafer ben Holech Dvar Mitzvah of ben Holech Dvar Rashut. It depends if you're going for a mitzvah or not for a mitzvah. To lo mekri Dvar Rashut ela Holech Tayel. It's only considered a Rashut that you're not allowed to go on a boat right before Shabbat in case you get stuck. Is only if you're going for a teal, just for an outing. Rabbeinu Tam famously rules that somebody who's going for business, in order to get a parnasa, to have money, put food on the table, bar mitzvah. Such a person, says Rabbeinu Tam, is considered a bar mitzvah. When you're doing parnasa, when you're looking after your family, that is considered a bar mitzvah. From this it implies, says Tzurba Shiur, the low mazid mikri b'nidon didan. In our case, the guy is stuck in a business deal is not considered mazid, and therefore he can make up for his tefillah with tashlumin. Im ken yesh lomar, therefore you can say b'di'eved lo ikre posher or mazid in ma'avir kozman b'shvil hefsid mammon. If due to financial loss he's unable to get out, he misses a tefillah, he would not be considered mazid, and he would b'di'eved be allowed to daven tashlumin in the next tefillah.
If you misapply this principle, even though you've read this, you're thinking, okay, I happen to be at work and I'm just not going to do it because I'm going to lose parnasa for that reason. That's obviously a misappropriation of the. Yeah. Would that constitute then a bracha levatala if you do touch them?
I don't know if it's a bracha levatala because you're still subject to the circumstances that he's given, which is that parnasa is considered like shogeg or ba'ones.
Let's say you are.
If you're amazed and you did tashlumin, that would be a bracha levatala. Chazal did not enact an option to do tashlumin for amazed. It doesn't exist. It's right. It's a bracha levatala. If you think you're doing it l'shem tashlumin, maybe if you're doing a dava, maybe. But like, if you have in mind, I'm doing this for tashlumin, when a person's deliberately missed tefillah, that would be amazed. That'd be bracha levatala. It'd be like trying to daven musaf today. There was no institution for it. Okay. So the Beit Yosef also goes in this direction, which we just saw in Tzurba Shiur, and in source 4. So the Beit Yosef also in Archaim Kufchet says, well, it's only considered deliberate b'mezid when you skip the tefillah just without any bother. It's not because something's on your mind, it's just you choose, I don't fancy davening mincha today. Can't be bothered. Then that's what mazid is considered, but not somebody who under duress is stuck in a business meeting. That person, maybe they should leave, maybe they shouldn't, but they would be allowed to daven mincha. And the Shulchan Aruch brings both of these things that we've just seen in la halacha. Both somebody who thought they had enough time in the day and said I'll daven later, and then realized that they didn't have enough time, can do tashlumin. And also what the Tzurba Shiur said, somebody who's stuck in a business meeting. But because of the, I guess the danger of this tshuva, the Tzurba Shiur, in the Pandora's box that it opens, the Ramah says really one needs to plan not to be stuck in a business meeting before Shkia. Because the Ramah is bringing this to halacha, as you said, Caleb was very worried about the ramifications of releasing such a tshuva, and therefore he sort of reins it in. So let's see this inside. How the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah rule in source 5, or Chaim Kufchet. Hizid velo hitpalel tefillah achas. Somebody deliberately did not daven one tefillah. Ein la tashlumin afilu b'tefillah hasmuchala. Cannot make up for even in the next tefillah. Chet. Mi shelo hitpalel ba'od sheyesh lo zman hitpalel. Someone didn't daven when they still had time to daven. But he thought, I've got time. I've got a quick phone call or whatever, and then I'll daven. But he was mistaken. In the meantime, the time passed. He thought he had time to daven later, and it turned out he didn't. And similarly, this is the Tzurba Shiur now. Someone was bothered with financial concerns. Over the page, lidei hefsed. He's concerned about losing money. For Ali Dekach Hefsid and Hitpalel, and that's the reason they missed out davening. And similarly, Mishu Shikar, okay, Velo Hitpalel, very relevant for Purim. Somebody who was drunk and didn't daven. Kulam Chashuvim Anusim, V'yesh Lehem Tashlum. They're all considered anus, beyond their control, and they can do tashlum in the next tefillah. But the shikar has to have sobered up. Somebody who's already drunk at Purim morning can't daven mincha or ma'ariv, then they're in trouble. So Haggah says the Ramah, though, again, because he was concerned about this Truma Kadeshin that we read. Me, who, however, lachatchila ideally lo ya'avor zman tefillah mishum hefsed mama. You should not really allow davening time to pass because you've got a business meeting. In other words, don't fix a business meeting in the winter when you've got no time to daven mincha beforehand. It's only B'di'eved that the Truma Hadeshin wrote what he wrote. Two other cases which the Mishnah Berurah here is going to extend the heter of doing tashlumin to. In source 6, the Mishnah Berurah brings Oto Esek, somebody who's in that business. As the Mishnah Berurah, there are certain things you're not allowed to do before davening, like go for a business matter, go through a big business meeting. So even if you're doing something which was asur, and he started a business meeting right before davening, which is be'isur, which you're not really supposed to do. Since he didn't do this deliberately, because I don't care about davening. It's because he's got a business meeting and he thought he would have time to daven after the meeting. It's just that he forgot afterwards. Same rule would still apply. So as long as you don't deliberately say, I can't be bothered to daven, or I don't fancy davening, it's not considered mazid. And similarly, the end of source 6, he also adds shelo yavo, as the Mishnah Berurah, v'chen, and similarly, im hayat harud liknot v'limkos chorato. Somebody was in a business deal, selling, buying. Al yidei kach avar zman tefillah, he was busy and totally lost track of the time. Such a person would also be allowed b'di'eved to do tashlumin. Okay, so we've seen that if you're busy with various activities that prevent you for whatever reason, as long as you're not deliberately missing tefillah because you don't want to daven, you're allowed b'di'eved to do the second tefillah twice and make up with tashlumin. The Aruch HaShulchan expands this though and says it's not just if somebody was busy with something else. If somebody genuinely forgot, messed up, it was a Sunday, they didn't have anything going on and they just forgot, and they thought they had time to daven and they didn't, even if they're not preoccupied with something else, they would still allowed to they would still be allowed to daven tashlumin at the next tefillah, because it's not just dependent on being busy with another activity. Rather, explains the Aruch HaShulchan, it's dependent on just your kavanah. You didn't mean to deliberately miss tefillah, it was just a lapse on your part. So it says the Aruch HaShulchan in source 7, also in Kufchet. But your term is there more than this. Afilu yashev batel, even if we're sitting doing nothing, Sunday, right? V'higir zman tefillah v'haya yachol yitpalel, right? And it reached the time for davening. He could have davened now, but he was lazy. V'amar, and he said, Od yesh zman ashki is ages away. I've still got time to hitpalel. V'achar kach nishkach menu. And as a result, he totally forgot. He certainly hitpalel. He totally forgot he still needs to daven. Mikri gamkin honest. That's also called honest. To shikha have honest. Forgetting is honest, says the Aruch HaShulchan. V'chen, and similarly, sheyashav lishtot b'dimyono shelo yishtaker. Classic Aruch HaShulchan. Somebody who is sitting and they think, I'm just going to have one l'chayim. I'm not going to get drunk. V'nishtaker, and that person got drunk, and they're not going to sober up and be able to daven before shkia. V'avar zman, and the time passes for davening. Have honest. That's also honest. Kal shel davar. So the principal ruling is shelavad mazid gamur, as long as it's not total mazid, total deliberate trying to miss the tefillah. Have a bichlal shogeg. It's all included in shogeg, or anus, or it was beyond your control, or mut'eh, or somebody who's mistaken, or mashlim b'tefillah hasmucha, and you can make up for it in the following davening. So the Aruch HaShulchan expands, it's not just somebody who's preoccupied, but anyone who makes a silly mistake. Even if they weren't preoccupied, they're just lazy. Sorry? I suppose. But more, it's understanding the source of why Chazal were machmir, to not allow tashlumin, which was that pasuk from Kehele, mu'uvat lo yechol litkon, that somebody who is crooked cannot straighten things out. This person's not crooked. Stupid, maybe, but they're not crooked. They're not mu'uvat, which is corrupt.
People people's lives have been busier and busier. I wonder if they're adding more and more allowances to, just help include them rather than lose them.
It's possible. I mean, that's in general, the Aruch HaShulchan's way is as a communal Rav looked at things differently, someone like the Mishnah Berurah. But even the Mishnah Berurah himself, as you say, did add certain points. He added someone who's busy with schora, he was busy in the shop and missed the time. And the same is true with the other heter that the Mishnah Berurah brought as well. Not just for schora, but what was the other heter we saw? That he started Be'isur and then the meeting went on. Even though you shouldn't really be doing a big business meeting right before Mincha, we see that even the Mishnah Berurah was dealing with these questions. So I suppose there's something, what you're saying, that it's, as people got busy, they were still looking to make this halacha relevant. Because understanding that these people, even if they're wrong, what they did, they don't come under the category of Uvat Lo Yachal Litkom. Okay. Any other examples? So the Isha Yisrael here brings that the same is true for a tefillah which you made a mistake on. If a person made a mistake, well, we'll leave this Tain Talamata out because maybe with Diavad Tain Talamata in the Southern Hemisphere you don't have to repeat because the season's backwards here. But let's say somebody missed Ya'alev Yavo on Shachrit at Rosh Chodesh, and then they only realized at Mincha time, oh, I forgot Ya'alev Yavo at Shachrit. The same halacha would apply. Since they forgot the Ya'alev Yavo, their whole tefillah didn't count. They'd have to do Mincha twice. So even by missing one of the special things you have to insert, it requires tashlumin at the next tefillah as well, if you don't still have time to make up for the tefillah that you've just missed. So somebody who at Shachrit on Rosh Chodesh forgot Ya'alev Yavo, and only at Mincha time did they realize, oh, I forgot Ya'alev Yavo at Shachrit, would have to daven Mincha twice, and will be allowed to daven Mincha because they weren't Yotzei their Shachrit.
Well, because if they miss Mincha,
Oh, so
and then they got married, twice.
So there's a
Even if that's
I have to see if they're going to discuss it later on. But big machloket. You've asked an important question, Jeff. What happens with mincha? It's a big machloket in the Chachmei Provence. I don't know if they bring it in the Sefer. Mincha time, or see, it might be later on. Mincha time. Somebody forgets Ya'alev Yavo at mincha on the last. Let's say it's one day Rosh Chodesh. They forget mincha, or the last day Rosh Chodesh. They forget Ya'alev Yavo at mincha. At Mariv, they realize, oi, I didn't say Ya'alev Yavo at mincha. Like to they're sure. If they're sure they didn't. Should they daven Mariv twice? What do we say? So it depends. According to this Isha Yisrael, they weren't Yotzei Mincha. So big machok in the Chachmei Provence. If they weren't Yotzei Mincha at all because they missed Ya'alev Yavo, then they got to daven. They weren't Yotzei Mincha. So they should do Mariv twice. But if they were Yotzei Mincha, it's just they weren't Yotzei Mincha on Rosh Chodesh, a Rosh Chodesh Mincha, then davening Mariv twice won't help because they're not going to say Ya'alev Yavo now anyway because it's no longer Rosh Chodesh. So the halacha is that in that case, it's machloket, and that strictly speaking, you don't have to repeat Mariv twice, but it's good to do a tefillah nadava. So do a second amida as a nadava, as a voluntary tefillah. However, that won't help you when Rosh Chodesh is Friday, because you're not allowed to do a tefillah nadava on Shabbos because they wouldn't offer private nadavot in the Beit HaMikdash. So if like this, we just had this. It's always a question that comes to Rabbi: can I do mincha twice, Mariv twice? And in this case, everyone will say no because you can't do a tefillah nadava. You can't be yotzei both opinions because it's Shabbos. You can't do a nadava on Shabbos. Somebody on Friday was Rosh Chodesh, let's say Friday, who missed Ya'alev Yavo in Mincha and only realized at Mariv time, couldn't do a nadava. They just do one and hold like the other opinion. There's a machloket in the Chachamim of Provincia of Provence. But anyway, the Isha Yisrael does seem to go in one direction here, and he says in source 8, Adam shene enas v'lo haya be'efsharuto lipalel tfilat shmona esrei. Somebody who God is control could not daven. Somebody was ill or shikar ba'avaz man tfilah and time passed. Or sheta'a b'tfilah v'davar shetzarech lachzor lipalel, or made a mistake like they forgot Ya'alev Yavo. V'nizkal achar she'avaz man tfilah and only remembered afterwards, after the time of tfilah had already passed. Or they forgot. make up for it in the next tefillah. He's adds something interesting at the end. A child who misses a tefillah, you don't have to teach him tashlumin. There's no cholva of chinuch, at least to instruct a child that they have to do tashlumin. But if you miss things though itself, then they do have to. Okay. What about somebody who missed the entire period of the tefillah? And the classic case which the poskim deal with is the case of onen, somebody who's waiting to bury a karov, a relative, is patur from tefillah. And for the entirety of that time, let's say they missed the whole thing, what should they do? So the Rosh discusses it. He says, so says the Rosh, there was a time when my father was an avel, shemet lo yeled b'Shabbat. Shmoneh yamim kodem Rosh Hashanah, before Rosh Hashanah, L'motzei Shabbat lo hitpalel, he didn't daven marin, Motzei Shabbos, kedin onen shepater min tefillah, mikol mitzvot, ve'ein lo levarach lo hamotzi lo birkat hamazon, so he didn't daven Motzei Shabbos mariv, le'achar shekavru hamet hitpalel tefillah boker. And in the morning, he davened shacharit, after the Levine, he could daven shacharit. Aval tefillah ha'erev lo hitpalel kivan sha'avaz mana. He didn't daven mariv because the time had passed. But lo dami l'shachach lo hitpalel arvit shitpalel shacharit shtayim. It's not like somebody who missed a tefillah that they should daven the next tefillah twice. Kivan shemin hadin niftar b'laylim hitpalel, because an onen is fundamentally exempt by Chazal from davening this tefillah, and therefore the Rosh says in this case somebody would not make up for their tefillah. We'll talk about halacha l'maaseh. I think we'll just wrap it up here and we'll discuss next time. I do have to say though, I have a wedding next Monday night. So I'm very happy if people would like to learn next Tuesday night at 8:30. Is there a consensus that we could do? And I'm happy to send out a recording for those who want. Are there any nods that people can give me in the room or in Zoom that Tuesday could work? I'm happy to send a recording. The reason I'm very keen to do for next week because, okay, so please God, next Tuesday night we'll do 8:30 and I'll open Zoom and I'll also send a recording link. But in there, because the week after that is going to be Hanukkah. So next week will probably be our last week for a few weeks because I'm also going to take, they're going to have a couple of weeks off. So next week will be Tuesday and it will be our last one for about 4 weeks until mid January. So we will, please God, finish this chapter on Tashlumin and then have a nice break for the summer. Okay, and off to Mariv. See you all next Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye.